It started on a quiet afternoon in Los Angeles. The sun was soft in the sky, not too bright, not too dull. Just enough to light up the hills and whisper something gentle to the city. It was the kind of day that made people pause for a second. Longer before entering their cars, Keanu Reeves was one of those people. He stood next to his motorcycle, helmet in hand, staring out at the horizon as if trying to find something. But he wasn't looking for something. He was remembering someone, eh? Phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the screen and smiled. It was a name that always brought light to his face, Sandra. She had texted lunch. He didn't reply with words. He just rode. When Keanu reached the small cafe tucked between two bookstores in West Hollywood, she was already there. Bullock sat at a table outside, sunglasses on, sipping lemonade. She looked up, saw him, and smiled in a way that wasn't loud but deep. It was the kind of smile that came from history, from trust, from 1,000 quiet moments shared off-screen. "You're late," she said, teasing him. "You're early," he replied, pulling out the chair beside her. They ordered food, but barely touched it. They talked. Not about movies, not about Hollywood, not about the noise. They talked about life, about how Sandra had started gardening again, about how Keanu had been reading poetry from ancient Chinese writers, about silence, about laughter, and about peace. Then something shifted. A group of fans walked by. They were respectful, but one bold teenager, maybe 17, called out, "Hey Keanu, do you love Sandra?" Everyone laughed, even Sandra. It was harmless, innocent. The kind of thing you don't expect an answer to, but Keanu looked up, not with a frown, not with a grin, just stillness. "Yes," he said softly, "in every way that matters." Sandra's smile faded for a second, not in sadness, but in shock. Then it returned, brighter, warmer, deeper. The teenager froze. So did the others. Keanu didn't explain. He didn't have to. There was no performance in his voice, no need to impress. It was like breathing. Like telling someone the sky was blue. The group walked away, unsure of what they had just witnessed. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't a scene. It was something real. But behind that real moment were years of unspoken memories. Years of standing beside each other through storms that never made it to the headlines. Years of showing up when the cameras weren't rolling. In that silence, something had grown. Something both of them had always known but never said aloud. After the fans disappeared, Sandra looked at Keanu. "You're not supposed to say things like that out loud," she whispered. Keanu sipped his tea and shrugged. "Why not?" "Asked, because it changes everything," she said. He looked at her and smiled. Not the kind you see in movie posters, but the kind that says, "I see you. All of you, and I'm not going anywhere." "Maybe," he said, "some things deserve to change." But the truth was, this wasn't the first time he had said it. He had said it before, just not with words. Many years ago, during the filming of their first movie together, there was a day when Sandra had broken down on set. She had smiled through it, joked through it, even delivered her lines perfectly. But Keanu had seen something in her eyes, something cracked. He had walked to her. Trailer during lunch break, holding a small brown bag. Inside was a warm sandwich, her favorite, and a note that said, "You don't always have to be okay. I'm here." She never asked how he knew. She just sat with him, eating in silence, knowing that someone finally understood. That was the first time he said it. The second time was years later when Sandra's mother passed away. Keanu didn't send flowers. He didn't post anything on social media. Just showed up at her door with a box of candles and a bottle of her mom's favorite wine. He sat on the porch with her, in silence, until the stars came out. That was the second time he said it, and now here they were. Years later, older, a little more tired, but softer too. And someone had asked the question neither of them had dared to answer before, "Do you love Sandra?" He had said yes. Not for attention, not for drama, but because it was the truth. And in her heart, Sandra had known it all along. But now, hearing it out loud, it hit different. Later that evening, Sandra went home and stood in her kitchen, holding a glass of wine, thinking about everything. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Keanu. "If you want to talk, you know where to find me." She smiled. "I always have," she whispered to herself. Outside, the city lights blinked like stars trying to find their place in the sky. And inside her heart, something had shifted, not because of what he said, but because she finally let herself believe it. For years, they had danced around it, hid behind friendship, behind jokes, behind timing. But now the door was open, not wide. Just enough. And sometimes, that's all it takes. It had been 3 days since Keanu said those words. 3 days since. The world paused for a moment in Sandra's heart. She had kept herself busy. She did laundry, watered her plants, baked a cake she didn't even want to eat. Every room in her house felt too quiet, even when music was playing. Because her mind was too loud, she couldn't stop replaying it. Not just the words, but how he said them. Yes, every way that matters. She didn't know if she was supposed to call him, or ignore it, or pretend it never happened. It would be easier, maybe, to act like nothing had changed. But something had. And deep down, she didn't want to pretend anymore. On the 4th day, she walked into her agent's office for a casual meeting. Just updates, scripts, new offers. She didn't plan to stay long. But as soon as she stepped inside, she felt it. Eyes, every assistant, every intern, even her own agent were looking at her differently. Then it clicked. "What happened?" she asked. Her agent blinked. "You haven't seen it?" "Seen what?" Handed her a tablet. On the screen was a clip. Someone had recorded that moment outside the cafe. The teenager's question, Keanu's answer, the pause, the smile on her face. All of it. And now it had over 6 million views. Sandra stared at the screen, stunned. The headline read, "Keanu finally confesses his love for Sandra. Her smile says everything." She felt her breath catch. Not because it was a secret, but because now the world knew, and that meant something had to change. Her agent leaned in carefully. This ... might actually be good. The fans are loving it. People are calling it the most honest thing they've seen all year. Sandra nodded slowly, but inside, her heart was spinning, because she knew this wasn't about fans. This wasn't about headlines. This was about them. And they had always kept things private. Always protected whatever it was they shared. And now, it was exposed. Keanu, meanwhile, wasn't even online. He had turned off his phone after sending that last message, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't need the noise. He had said what he meant, and now he was giving her space. He spent those days riding through the hills, watching the sunrise, stopping by small diners where no one recognized him. It felt peaceful, honest, like the silence between notes in a song. But when he finally turned his phone back on, he found hundreds of missed calls, texts, messages. He scrolled until he saw the one he was waiting for, from Sandra. "Can we talk?" He didn't reply. He just went. When she opened the door to her house, he was already standing there. No words at first. Just the kind of silence that said everything loud. She stepped aside, and he walked in. They sat on her couch, a cup of tea between them. No cameras. No fans. Just 2 old friends in a room filled with truth. "You saw the video?" she asked softly. "I did," he said. "I didn't know they were recording. Neither did I." "Are you okay with it?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "I meant what I said. Whether one person heard it or a million." Sandra looked at him, really looked, and saw no fear, no regret, only peace. "I meant what I smiled," she said quietly. He smiled too, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. They didn't make any decisions that night. They didn't talk about what happened next. They just existed in that moment. Together, they watched an old movie, not one of theirs. Something black and white, with soft music and long pauses. The kind of movie that lets you breathe between scenes. When it ended, Keanu stood to leave. Sandra followed him to the door. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "why we never talked about this before?" Keanu nodded. "Timing. Do you think..." "The timing is right now." He thought for a moment. I think we're finally brave enough. She nodded, eyes soft. So what happens now? He stepped closer. We stop hiding. Then he left, not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with the kind of goodbye that held the weight of something just beginning. The next morning, Sandra's house phone rang, an old landline she barely used. She answered, confused. Hello? The voice on the other end was gentle, older. Ms. Bullock? Yes, it's the sister Miriam. I work at the shelter downtown. I believe you donated to us last year. Sandra smiled. Yes, of course. Is everything all right? We just wanted to invite you to our anniversary lunch next Sunday. Small, quiet. Just a few of us. I'd be honored if you could join. Sandra hesitated. She rarely accepted public invites these days, but something in the sister's voice reminded her of stillness. I'd love to, she said, and as she hung up, she felt something unusual, a kind of calm she hadn't felt in years. On Sunday, she arrived at the shelter. Simple building, clean, but modest, full of life. Volunteers moving in and out, kids laughing in the back. Old songs playing softly on a speaker inside. She wore jeans and a plain white blouse. No makeup, no entourage. She didn't need it. As she stepped inside, the smell of home-cooked food wrapped around her like a hug. And there, across the room, standing with a group of kids, was Keanu. He hadn't told her he'd be there, but of course he was. He looked up, saw her, and smiled. She laughed softly, walking toward him. Are you following me? She asked. Or maybe he said you followed your heart. She smiled again, and for the first time, surrounded by strangers who didn't care about fame, they sat side by side. They served food, washed dishes, helped an old man fix his walker. And somewhere between those simple acts, something bloomed. Truth they had both carried in silence was now free to breathe, and everyone around them could feel it. Not because of what they said, but because of how they looked at each other, how they moved in harmony without effort, how they simply ... word together. The next morning, Sandra woke up feeling different. Not in a big dramatic way, but something small had shifted. Like a window had opened during the night. Now fresh air was moving through the parts of her heart she had forgotten about. She sat on the edge of her bed and smiled. Keanu. He hadn't said much yesterday, but then again, he never needed to. Just being there serving soup, washing dishes, laughing with the kids was enough. And every time their eyes met across the room, she felt something solid, something safe. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't for headlines. It was just him. And her, and maybe finally, something real was starting. Meanwhile, in a different corner of the city, Keanu stood in front of his mirror. He didn't recognize himself, not because his face had changed, because his eyes looked lighter. Like a weight had been lifted that he didn't even know he was carrying. He thought about Sandra, her laugh, her grace. The way she always tried to take care of others before herself. He had watched her grow for years, not just as an actress, but as a person, through pain, through joy, through quiet strength, and now, for the first time, he wondered if it was finally okay to stop walking beside her and start walking with her. But a small part of him still hesitated, because when you've protected something for so long, the thought of holding it openly can feel scary. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let fear win this time. That afternoon, Sandra got an unexpected call. Her assistant, Olivia, sounded nervous. Sandra, I know you didn't want to do interviews this month, but what happened? The Hollywood Voices podcast reached out. They're doing a special on kindness and connection in the film industry, and they want you and Keanu together. Sandra paused. They're asking about that video, aren't they? They say they're not, Olivia replied. But you know how these things go. Sandra took a breath. Tell them yes, but under one condition. What's that? If we talk about what matters, not just what people want to hear. Keanu agreed without hesitation. And 2 days later, they sat across from each other in a small podcast studio, microphones between them, the host smiling awkwardly. Thank you both for being here, the host began. Before we start, I just want to say that video outside the cafe, wow, the world loved it. Keanu smiled politely. Sandra stayed quiet. The host continued. I want to talk about connection. Real human connection. The kind you two clearly share. Where does that come from? Sandra glanced at Keanu. He nodded softly. It comes from trust, she said, and time, showing up when it matters. People say Hollywood friendships are fake. The host added. Keanu leaned forward slightly. They're not fake. They're just fragile. The world around us is loud, but the real ones, the people who see you when the camera turns off, those are the ones who stay. The host smiled. And would you say love has something to do with that? The room went quiet. Sandra looked at Keanu. Her heart beat faster, but he didn't blink. Double quotes, yes, he said calmly. Not just romantic love, but respect, care, presence. That kind of love matters most. And then Sandra did something unexpected. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Not a performance, not a stunt. Just truth. The host blinked, unsure what to say. Thank you, the host whispered, and the recording ended. After the interview, they walked out together into the bright sunlight. No fans, no flashing lights. Just two people standing in the street, free from masks. Keanu looked at her. How do you feel? He asked. Lighter, she said. And you seen? They stood there for a long time, and then without planning it, without forcing it, he took her hand again. She didn't let go. Later that evening, Sandra sat in her backyard watching. The wind moved through the trees. She thought about how long she had guarded her heart, how long she had convinced herself that timing, distance, and fear were reasons to keep love at arm's length. But now things felt clearer, not easy, not perfect. But clear, and clarity was more powerful than anything else. She picked up her phone and texted Keanu, Would you come over? His reply was simple. Already on my way. They sat on her porch that night, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea, watching the stars. No talk about careers, no pressure, no confusion. Just a quiet understanding, and then she asked the question she had avoided for years. Why me, Keanu? Why have you always been there? He looked up at the stars. Because you never asked me to be someone else, he said. You saw me when I didn't see myself. Tears welled up in her eyes. She looked down, then back at him. I don't want to waste any more time. He nodded. Neither do I. And in that stillness, something beautiful happened. No fireworks, no grand speeches, just two people finally choosing each other. The next morning, the podcast episode dropped within hours. It was trending, not because of what was said, but because of what was felt. Fans all over the world commented, cried, shared their own stories of love, kindness, and long-held friendship. One comment stood out. This is what love looks like when you let it grow quietly. And just like that, Sandra and Keanu's story became more than just a headline. It became a reminder that kindness is louder than fame, that love doesn't need a spotlight, and that sometimes the best things come softly like morning light on a tired heart. The days that followed were quiet but full, not with noise, not with headlines, not with anything loud, but full of small, real moments that filled the air like sunlight warming the cracks of a cold floor. Sandra and Keanu didn't make a big announcement. They didn't call it anything. They just showed up for each other, again and again. A walk in the park, a handwritten note, a cup of coffee left at the door. It wasn't new, really. It was what they had always done. But now, something had shifted. There was no more pretending it wasn't love. One morning, Sandra woke up to the smell of pancakes. She walked into the kitchen, barefoot and sleepy, and found Keanu wearing one of her aprons, pouring syrup with a calm look on his face like he'd done this 1,000 times. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him. You're making breakfast now? She teased. I've been training for this moment my whole life, he said without looking up. They both laughed, but as she sat down and took the first bite, her smile faded a little, because for all the sweetness a thought had crept into her mind. What if this doesn't last? What if the world pulls us apart again? Keanu saw the shift in her eyes. He put down the spatula and sat across from her. What is it? She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "I'm scared." He didn't ask of what, just waited, and slowly she explained. "Every time something good happens, I wait for it to disappear, like it's not real, like the world's going to take it back." Keanu reached out and held her hand. "This is real," he said. "And if something tries to take it away, we'll fight for it." She looked into his eyes and saw no fear, only truth. "You mean that?" "With everything I've got," he said, and in that moment, she believed him. That night they attended a private charity gala, nothing big, just a few friends. Artists, supporters of a children's hospital Keanu had helped fund years ago. Sandra hadn't been to an event in months. She didn't like the noise, the flash, the way people stared. But this time she wanted to go with him. When they arrived hand in hand, the room stilled for a second. Not because of what they wore, not because they were celebrities, but because the energy around them was different. Calm, honest, glowing. People came up to greet them. But no one asked the usual questions. No one whispered rumors. Instead, they heard things like, "Thank you for being real. You give people hope." And that surprised them both, because they hadn't done anything extraordinary. They had just shown up for each other. For the world as they truly were. Later that night, on their way out, Sandra stopped suddenly. They were walking past a quiet hallway near the back of the venue. Away from the lights and voices, there was a painting on the wall. Small, simple, a young girl sitting alone on a bench, holding a tiny lantern. Her face calm, eyes wide. Sandra stared at it. "That was me," she said quietly. Keanu turned to her. "I used to feel like I had to hold the light for everyone else, even when mine was fading. Even when I was tired." Step beside her. "Don't have to do that alone anymore." She looked at him, eyes full. "Promise." He nodded. Double quotes. Always. And in that quiet hallway, with no one watching, she leaned into him, not for a photo, not for a memory, but because she finally could. Next morning, Sandra received a call from a young actress she had mentored years ago. "I saw the podcast," the girl said. "And the gala, Thank you for showing us it's okay to be soft, to be honest." Sandra smiled, holding back tears, because all her life she had been told to be strong, to be professional, to be polished. But now kindness was becoming the message, and she had Keanu to thank for that. Keanu, too, started getting messages not from fans, but from old friends. Fellow actors, people who had been through things like him. One, a retired stuntman, wrote, "Seeing you two is like watching the sun rise again after a long night. Don't let it set." Another said, "It's not just love, it's healing." Keanu sat in his garage reading those messages, surrounded by tools, books, and memories, and he thought about how strange and beautiful life was, how he had almost missed this, how easily. They could have stayed silent forever, but now the world was different, because they had told the truth. One evening they sat on a rooftop overlooking the city, blankets around their shoulders, tea in hand. The sky was turning gold. Sandra leaned her head on Keanu's shoulder. "Do you think it's okay to be happy?" she asked. He kissed the top of her head. "I think it's necessary." They watched as the first stars appeared. No rush, no noise, just stillness. But deep inside both of them, there was still one piece missing. They hadn't said the words. Not directly, not yet. And they both knew when the moment came. It wouldn't be planned. It would come when it was needed. Most not for the world, not for a headline, but for each other. And that moment was closer than they thought. A week passed like a quiet breath. Sandra and Keanu fell into something that didn't have a name, but felt more real than anything they had known. They moved through each day gently, like two rivers finally flowing side by side. They didn't rush, they didn't label it, but they knew still, deep down. They both felt something building, a quiet need, a truth waiting to be spoken, not because they owed it to anyone, but because sometimes the heart needs to hear what it already knows. Sandra was on set again. Her first film in 2 years. It was a small project, Independent, thoughtful, full of meaning. The kind she had waited for. Keanu had helped her rehearse, stayed late on the nights when she doubted herself, brought her coffee on mornings she forgot to eat, but now he was giving her space, cheering her from the sidelines, not as a shadow but as someone who believed in her more than she believed in herself. On the third day of filming, she was scheduled for a heavy emotional scene. She stood in front of the camera, heart pounding. She was supposed to cry on cue, deliver a powerful line, and walk away without looking back. But something in her cracked. Not because the scene was hard, because the truth underneath, it was too close. She froze. The director called cut. The crew waited in silence. Sandra looked down, took a deep breath, and walked off set. She didn't go to her trailer. She called Keanu. He answered on the first ring. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Don't know," she whispered. "Can you come? Already on my way?" He arrived 30 minutes later. No fanfare. No questions. Just him. He found her sitting alone on the back steps behind the studio, her face tired, her eyes red. He sat beside her. "Talk to me," he said. She didn't speak right away. Then she said, "I was trying to act like I was okay, like I could carry it all. But something in me just broke." He nodded. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," he said. Sandra looked at him, truly looked. "You've said that before," she whispered. "But I think I was too scared to believe it, and now I want to say something. Something I've been holding for a long time." He didn't move. He didn't rush her. She turned toward him, tears in her eyes. "I love you, Keanu." The words hung in the air like stars finally finding their place in the sky. Soft, honest, real Keanu. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. He reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "I've always loved you," he said. "But now I don't want to hide it anymore." And in that moment, something broke open, not in a painful way, but like a dam. Giving way to a flood of peace, they held each other close. No camera, no applause. Just a truth they had waited years to say. That night she didn't go back to set. They drove out of the city. No destination, it's just the open road, the stars above, and the wind through the windows. They stopped at a small diner in the middle of nowhere. Ordered pancakes and eggs at midnight. The waitress didn't recognize them. They didn't mind. They sat in a booth, laughing softly, sharing stories they had never told each other. And when the food came, Sandra looked at him and said, "Promise me something. Anything. Promise we won't let the world change this." Keanu smiled. "I promise." A few days later, Sandra returned to set. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked into that emotional scene with full honesty and delivered it. With a depth that made the room go still. When the director yelled, "Cut!" the crew clapped not because she cried on cue, but because they felt the truth behind it. Something had changed in her, and people noticed. Not just on camera, but in how. She carried herself, calmer, brighter. Keanu too felt different. One evening, he visited the shelter again. The same one they had gone 2 weeks earlier. He wasn't there to be seen. He didn't bring cameras or press. He just helped. Washed dishes, played with the kids, fixed a broken table in the back room, but one little girl tugged on his shirt as he stood near the door. "Are you that movie man?" she asked shyly. Keanu knelt down. Maybe he smiled. "You're in love, huh?" Blinked. "What makes you say that? You look happy?" my mommy says. "People in love smile like they're hiding a secret." He laughed gently. "Your mommy sounds very smart." The girl nodded and ran off. Keanu stood up, heart full. Yes, he was in love. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. That weekend, they went to Sandra's lake house, just the two of them. No phones, no scripts. They built a fire, cooked. Simple meals, read old poetry books out loud. And one night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, Keanu looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Of course. Do you believe in soulmates?" She thought for a moment. "I used to think it was a fantasy," she whispered. "But now, I think it's two people who choose each other." over and over, even when it's hard. Even when they're scared, he nodded. Then I believe it too. They sat in silence, letting that truth sink in, and in the middle of the quiet, he reached for her hand and held it tight. No ring, no promises spoken aloud, but everything that mattered was there in the way he looked at her, in the way she leaned closer, in the way neither of them let go. The lake was still. Soft ripples moved across the surface like a breath. The morning sun had not yet broken the horizon, but the sky was already painted with gentle streaks of orange and lavender. Sandra stood barefoot on the old wooden dock. Wrapped in a wool sweater, her hands curled around a warm mug of tea behind her. She heard the soft creak of the cabin door. Keanu stepped out, hair slightly messy, wearing one of her scarves like it belonged to him. And maybe now it did. He walked up beside her and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. After a moment, she spoke, voice soft like the wind. I used to think love had to be loud, dramatic, like in the movies. Keanu glanced at her, and now she smiled. Now I think it feels like this. He reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. Me too. In the days that followed, they stayed in that quiet place longer than planned. Something about it slowed the world down. They cooked, painted, read, napped by the fire, laughed like they used to when they were younger and still figuring out who they were. No headlines, no cameras. It's just time. Time to grow into this new chapter together on one of those days. Sandra found a journal on the bookshelf she hadn't touched. In years, she opened it and saw her own handwriting from over a decade ago. It was a list of things she wanted in her life. Peace, someone who sees me mornings with no rush. Trust, love that doesn't need proving, stared at it for a long time, then she took out a pen and wrote next to each one, Keanu. When they finally returned to the city, they weren't afraid anymore. They didn't hide. They went to bookstores together, held hands in public, attended a quiet film event, and sat beside each other in the back row, whispering about the trailers. World saw them, but this time, it didn't matter what anyone thought, because they knew the truth, and that truth was enough. One evening, they were invited to an awards ceremony. Neither of them had planned to go, but something about it felt right now. They didn't walk the red carpet like stars. They walked it like people who'd finally found home in each other during the event. A presenter brought up their story. The moment outside the cafe. The way the world paused when Keanu answered that question, the crowd clapped. Then the presenter said something unexpected. It's not often you see two people in this town choose something real, but what they've shown us is that kindness. And love can survive even here. The camera cut to them for a second. Sandra smiled, and Keanu reached over, gently took her hand and whispered, "See? I told you people would understand." After the show, they stood alone on a quiet balcony. The city stretched beneath them, lights blinking like stars that had fallen. "I want to tell you something," Sandra said. Keanu looked at her. "I've loved you since we wrapped our first movie," she said. "I didn't know it then, not really, but something in me changed." He stepped closer. "You once asked if it was okay to be happy," he said. "I think this is our answer." Nodded, eyes filled with tears. "I'm not afraid anymore. Neither am I." He pulled her into a gentle embrace. No crowd, no spotlight. Just the sound of the wind and the soft thump of two hearts finding the same rhythm. Months passed, seasons changed, but some things stayed the same. They continued to show up for each other in the little ways, notes left in pockets, quiet dinners on, the balcony books read aloud on rainy nights. Not perfect, but real. One morning, Sandra received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, no return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for reminding us that love doesn't need permission to be beautiful. You and Keanu gave us more than a story, you gave us hope. No signature, just that." She folded the letter, held it to her chest, and let a tear fall down her cheek. Not out of sadness, but gratitude. Later that evening, she sat beside Keanu on their couch, the fire crackling nearby. Do you ever think about how it all started? She asked. He smiled. You mean lunch at the cafe? No, she said. The real start. He nodded slowly. The first time I saw you walk onto set, you smiled like you carried the whole sky with you. Sandra laughed softly. You didn't even talk to me that day. I didn't have to, he said. But I already knew. He sat in silence, the kind that needed no filling. And then quietly she said, I'm glad we found each other. He leaned in, forehead touching hers. We didn't find each other, he whispered. We chose each other. And that made all the difference. The world kept turning, the news kept changing, but somewhere in the middle of it all, two people walked forward together, not with a bang, but with a quiet love that moved, because it came from the deepest place in the heart. And for anyone still wondering, yes, he loved her in every way that mattered. And this time, the whole world saw her smile and knew what it meant.